This is EmergencyFD Storyline.
In order to actually be successful at this job and not just go in it for the t-shirt, you have to have the right heart and mindset for it, and you got to have a servant's heart. That's what my whole purpose and this whole journey's been. I feel like I'm put on this earth to help people, and that's what this job does.
What kind of individual does it take to be a firefighter? How do you start? I can tell you this, it takes hard work and determination. This is the story of one firefighter and his journey from the start on the job. The views expressed on this program are from the guest and the host and do not necessarily represent the views of any government agency, private company, or public service. EmergencyFD Storyline's focus is to tell the stories of those in the fire service and to highlight what matters to our first responders. I'm your host, Tom Mann. Since I started this podcast, my goal has been to tell stories, share perspectives, and give you a glimpse of the world of the fire service, whether you're in the fire service or you're not. This interview is close to home for me. You see, I watched a kid who played firefighter, admired firefighters, grow to become one of the best, and his journey was not easy. I sat down in my studio one late evening after the rest of the family had gone to bed to get this firefighter story. He's been on the job since he was 18, and now he's in his third decade of life. You see, some call him Junior, some call him Thomas or Tom. I call him Russ, and he is my son. This is part one of an interview with Memphis firefighter Thomas Mann, Jr. He now works in special operations with the Memphis Fire Department. And as a father, I am very proud of the journey and life he's taken to serve others. This is his story, and just like so many others, his life demonstrates the kind of character of a person that makes the fire service special. The Making of a Firefighter. That's our storyline. Well, with me in the studio is my own son, who's a firefighter, advanced EMT with the City of Memphis Fire Department. And Russ, glad you're here.
Good to be here.
Hey, today I want to talk about how you got involved in firefighting for somebody who wants to get involved with firefighting or is involved. Just curious how you got involved with it because you have kind of a unique story. What got you interested in firefighting in the first place?
I had to say it was you.
How did that happen?
Your attachment with the fire department back in the 90s. I just remember as a kid, a number of times that you just, POV'd, took your personal vehicle to certain large scenes, and I just remember sitting either in one of the fire trucks, the engines, the aerials, or just sitting in your car watching these guys do crazy stuff. I thought it looked cool.
Yeah, I can remember a couple of times, which I don't want to tell your mother about. We went to these scenes, and I would go inside to tape something. I remember putting you in the cab of a fire engine. Some, driver kind of watched over you for an hour or two, and you were just sitting up there. I don't know, you were somewhere between 5 and 7 years old, I think, if that old. You may have been 4 at one time doing that. One other time, I needed a shot of a kid being brought out of a burning building. They were doing a controlled burn at one of the fire departments in the area, and the television station came out too to do a story, and I was there also taping and helping with that.
Yeah,
and
Mom didn't like this one.
No, not at all. And I remember we took you inside when the thing was on fire, and a firefighter put you in his coat, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, while we were in there, yeah.
And
then I guess once the point came out, there was enough smoke coming out, where it wasn't going to be choking me or whatever. That's when, I played dead and he carried me out. I remember that.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. So was that kind of it? I guess, was that what really got you interested, those things, or just seeing the scene?
Every single firefighter I'd ever met, as a kid was just the coolest guy ever. And it had nothing really to do with what they're doing. It was the personality type. Every one of them were all friendly. And then, at the same time, the stuff that they do. One that stands out to me was an apartment fire. I don't know where it was, when it was, but I just remember they had evacuated all the people, but there was animals inside. And so the guys had laddered a number of the windows when we're going in, and they were literally passing animals out the windows and bringing it down the ladder and bringing, I think it was a couple dogs and some cats, brought them down to the family members that were on the ground. And to me, as a kid, I was like, that's cool.
Is that one of the fire scenes?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember which one. There's so many of them.
That might have been the one where it was really cold.
Oh,
and
yeah. Okay.
I had been walking on that water, and eventually I got put in, the 100-foot rear mount cabs.
Yeah, I remember that.
To warm up. The heater was good. I remember that.
You did like it.
Yeah, he created a monster.
I guess I did. One year we both went as firefighters, I think at Halloween or something like that, and bought you a little helmet, little bitty coat. You had an axe, and you were running around with that.
Oh, yeah.
You gave up Spider-Man to do that. That's what I remember.
Yeah, stop climbing walls. Instead, I was going to try to break them.
Gosh. But what everybody doesn't realize, for some reason, that was dormant for a long time. Okay, what a lot of people don't know, you were involved with music. And so tell them what you were doing. You went all the way into college, and you got, a full ride scholarship in music, right?
Yes, for playing the oboe.
The oboe, which originally we thought was the hobo. You came and said you couldn't play that.
I played it for 8 years. Before I went to college, went to full scholarship.
I thought you went through a year, didn't you?
I did. I did. And I say almost a year because I was skipping some classes, Dad.
Yeah, well, I don't need to hear about that one. But after that whole year, and a lot of folks don't realize that, you oboe, you also guitar, piano, you did a lot of music.
I play a lot of instruments. I just didn't feel like it was the right thing for me.
At the end of that first semester in college, and you actually called me, and I think your exact words were, Dad, God doesn't want me doing this. I'm like, doing what? And he said, no, not this thing in music. I love music, and I kind of want to do it on my own for fun and as a hobby, but I don't think I want this as a career. That kind of changed. I say all this because, I think a lot of people maybe think, well, these guys, everybody came out of a jock thing or whatever, and that's how they got involved with firefighting, but that's not necessarily true.
No. I played tennis. I played the oboe. I was in the Memphis Youth Symphony. I was on the math team. I taught myself calculus
forgot about
in high school.
Yeah.
No, I was the exact opposite of the typical.
What they stereotype firefighters as.
100%. Yeah. And, that's a common misconception, but I can tell you a lot of the people I work with, especially which we'll get to it later, but in special operations, everybody in there is incredibly intelligent. Everyone probably easily could have been, an engineer, some sort of, something in the science field, mathematics. I think we all have this thirst for a little bit of chaos
and just about this same time, here's another thing, a characteristic I gotta just spill the beans on. You had a tendency to love to drive at high speeds. You got in a lot of trouble for a while there, going at high speeds.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I do, because I remember getting phone calls from these, these law enforcement guys saying, "Is this Mr. Mann?" Yes. We caught your son doing it. It was heavy duty speed. He was drag racing at this location.
Well, I remember the one you're talking about, and I happened to be going through a public, whatever. We'll just throw it out there. Shelby Farms.
Very large road. Was it Walnut Grove or something like that at Memphis?
Mm-hmm. We'll just say the speed limit was 55, and I was going a little bit more than twice the speed limit.
Yeah, and I got that call.
Yeah. I thought for sure I was going to jail.
Well, he called me up and asked me, because you were younger than the gentleman, apparently you were racing.
Yes.
And said he was going to jail, but since your son is still a minor, do I have permission to scare him to death? And I said, go ahead.
He sure did. He sure did.
So anyway, this is kind of where you came out of. So you had this passion for going at high speeds. I remember that. You were somewhat of an adrenaline junkie with a lot of things. I do remember that. And then you had all this music stuff that was going on. So you've been in college a whole year, and you tell me that you don't want to do that anymore. And I thought, oh, no.
Sounds crazy.
Yeah.
You remember in high school, I had actually talked about how I wanted to go to the Air Force. It was
I
something
did.
thought
Yeah,
about
you were
that.
talking about that.
And you said, well, you know, you need to wait on that. Do some other things first. Go to college and then see what you think. And then I still felt that calling for the Air Force. You said, you know what, before you do the Air Force again, why don't you come move up here with me, take some time. If you still want to go in the Air Force after you're here a little bit, then okay, cool. Then, you know, I'll support you. But why don't you think about it some more? That's always your famous words. Why don't you think about it a little bit more? When it's one of those things where we're like, are you crazy? You never say it like that. Why don't you think about it a little bit more? Pray about it.
I kept hearing I want to move to Alaska, and that's what the big thing was. I want to join the Air Force. I want to move to Alaska and live in the cold. That was really your thing for a while there.
I got a full scholarship to University of Alaska Fairbanks, by the way.
Yeah, I didn't know about that one. Oh.
But anyway, no, when I got up here, I don't even really know how I got plugged into Williamson County Fire, but
I do.
How?
It was right after you moved back, and we were in the car driving somewhere. We went down the road, and there's the fire station, not even a mile, quarter mile, half mile down the road from us. Mm-hmm. And we were driving by that station. They had a sign out front and said, volunteers needed or something. Do you want to be a firefighter? And they had a sign out front. We will train you. And we drove by there, and you looked at me and your eyes lit up really big. I didn't even know you were following up on that, but you showed up at the house with a helmet and turnouts.
Mm-hmm. You got a picture of that.
I got a picture of that. You just showed up out of the blue, and you had a big grin on your face, and you said, I'm a firefighter. That's really how it began. It was that quick. Were you 19 then?
Yes. I ran my first couple calls before I turned 19.
That was a big thing.
And I became a monster with that. In the first year that I was there was only one person in the fire department that beat me in my call responses, to the number of calls, and that was a buddy of mine. So I had the second most runs, and it was my first year ever.
And it was paid on call. And I heard very shortly after that you were driving a fire engine.
It's really responsible. Not crazy at all, right?
This was, of course, my head was going back to the year or two before that when I was getting those phone calls about you drag racing in the middle of the city of Memphis, essentially, is where that was. Whoever it was said, your son's pretty good driving really fast. He said he's very good at it.
I've heard that before.
And somehow your record...
Well, it fell off when I turned 18.
Turned 18, that's right.
Most of my stupid escapades were when I was a minor, so... There was a big need at that station. They gave me a little, Motorola, Minute 3, pager. This is back in 2010, so that was actually old then.
It went off 24/7 here at the house.
I love that thing.
Your sister loved it. I remember that. It would go off. She would say, he woke me up again last night. She was in law school.
Yeah, it was, I'd say, with me going... the speed limit, I could get to the station probably about a minute, roughly.
Yeah.
So my job, the first little bit while I was still learning was just to get there, crank up the engine or the tanker or both, depending on what type of call it was, have it ready for the senior guys that are going to show up, then they drive. Not long after that, they kind of taught me how to pump.
But this is not just your average fire engine because, again, what was the main issue with it? It was an aged, how we say, a seasoned fire engine.
Yeah, that's a very politically correct way to put it. This thing, I think the only working gauge on the entire pump panel was just the discharge going to one of the crosslays. No other gauge worked. So we basically would tune off of how the engine sounded at the time, like the actual motor in the pumper.
That's how you learn how to pump. It was sound, right?
Yeah, the RPM gauge inside the instrument cluster inside the cab didn't work. Speedometer worked, though. We knew we could top it out at 76, but anyway, I knew that. But no, it was a unique experience. It was an open cab. Not many things to indicate how well you're doing worked other than just someone would tell you, hey, give me a little bit less pressure, give me more pressure. Became like a learning game. That, even just operating that set me up for success later on. And this department that I started on was pretty unique. To my knowledge, it was 274 square miles, 7 stations. We had 8 tankers that didn't have a pump on it. primarily all of our water supply was water shuttle. We had like less than 20 working fire hydrants that was in our actual response area. So we covered all of the unincorporated areas in the county.
In southern Illinois, so yeah.
Mm-hmm. We were the kings as far as water shuttle goes. And that old pumper we had a fantastic pump on it. We were able to supply multiple hand lines, one of the 100-foot, aerials that without any issues. It had plenty to go. That pumper, the group of guys, we had a number of people on that station at the time. I mean, 3 of them had over 20 years, experience. This wasn't your normal, like, little town, paid on call or volunteer department. We were running 400 calls a year. That's not medicals. We didn't run medical at all. It was just fire. Out of the 400 calls, usually about 40 to 50% were fires. Whether that's, majority of the time it's wildland. Wildland was a huge thing. I'm really glad I had that experience. A lot of structure fires. And when we got there, due to, distance, response times and stuff like that, the houses were usually very well involved. So it's not like we would sit there and surround and drown. We would still make entry. Being on Memphis Fire Department, see how our operations are. There's a huge difference when you have a hole cut in the roof. You got that poked through the ceiling, and you can vent out a lot of that heat. We didn't have that luxury. I can't remember a single time on Williams County Fire I cut a hole in the roof. So our firefighting was with all the heat.
How did that volunteer situation really help you? Because
you had to learn how to do everything. Literally everything. It's not like you're assigned to a truck company and you just do truck work until you either transfer to a different house and you get on an engine company. We did everything. I mean, we knew how to cut holes. We would do training on it all the time. We knew ventilation. All of us would throw ladders. We knew how to do the suppression side. We knew how to pump. So it was one of those things where you just improvised on scene, and whatever task had to get done that wasn't getting done, you already knew how to do it.
But in a rescue, too. You guys did a lot of the automobile accidents down I-57.
Oh.
Constantly.
Extrication. Like, I've never seen anything like it, but this stretch of interstate on I-57 in southern Illinois, just insane extrications. And that was the other thing, is I learned a lot of techniques that, your average city firefighter will never, ever learn. Extrication on buses, school buses, metropolitan buses, semi-extrication. We did it all. There's a number of things that you just pick up as you go along, and that was one of those on-the-job training, and then, eventually I did take some advanced extrication classes, and I was able to apply some of that later on. But ironically, I had already been doing a lot of those techniques and just didn't know what they were called. In Illinois, they call them fifth door, third door, but, little stuff like that, doing a sideways flap on a roof if it's on the side, being able to use, we did all these things. We used airbags. We used struts. We would do a dash lift instead of a dash roll, using spreaders so you got more leg room. Just all these things that, we didn't even really know what they were necessarily called, but it worked. The guys that I was learning from, they had done them and they knew they worked. And so it was one of those things when you do something like, no, change the angle of the spreader, put it right here. And I'm going to put some cribbing under here, underneath where the A posts, would meet the ground. Now you got something to pry against. Stuff like that you get taught in a class. We didn't have the classes, so we just...
You did it.
We just did it, yeah. We would learn what would work.
These were guys that didn't have, I guess you say, the luxuries that a lot of city firefighters get, where they go through a big academy and there's all these other things. But they had some incredible practical experience. And so they were actually mentoring you and teaching you. I remember I felt very confident because they were thinking about a lot of things, because you didn't have the number of companies coming in on a fire. Sometimes it was 1 or 2 of you, 3, 4 if you got lucky, showing up
personnel
to us. Personnel, yeah.
Okay, I was going to clarify.
Yeah, not apparatus. We're talking about personnel.
Yeah, and what's weird is I miss that. There's times where I've turned around and we got 10 people inside a house, and you're just going, why is everybody in here right now? I don't even have room to work, But yeah, no, showing up on scene, having, maybe 3 of you. One guy's, he's got a pump. The other 2, they're going to make entry. I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't make entry a couple times by myself. I didn't go far in, but far enough in to be able to hit the seat of the fire and stuff. It's such a unique experience. It really armed me for the future, on certain aspects, like especially like fire behavior and stuff. But up here, I mean, it seemed like we trained with other counties, other cities that were in, up to like 90 miles away. I remember one time we took, 3 or 4 of our apparatus, 2 counties north to go to a house burn. And there's like 30 people there, for this house burn. And that wasn't uncommon. That was a unique community bond that we had with all sorts of other departments. I mean, there was, we had what we call, which I think is fantastic. They said it's the MEMPHIS system, mutual aid box alarm system. Basically, we had these preset agreements with these departments that once you had this type of incident and you decide to strike a box, which is like the equivalent of giving like a second alarm on fire, then you would get resources from various different departments for whatever their specialty is, or, whatever makes sense. So, we were running mutual aid constantly too. And when we run mutual aid with people, we had to bring a pumper, and we're usually bringing 2 or 3 tankers, because most of the time when they'd call us, they need water supply. And then you're going to have extra personnel, because it only takes one person to run that pumper to fill, the tankers up at the whatever fill site we're using. So the extra personnel would just sit there and help out on scene. Up until this past year, I finally got a fire that was bigger that I can say is the biggest fire I've been on. Before that, the largest fire I'd ever been on was actually at a mine up here, a coal mine. I think it was like a 55,000 gallon diesel container, that had like a floating roof. Somehow it caught on fire. I guess it was like an electrical thing. A shed next to it caught on fire, which caused the whole thing to catch on fire. We were there for, I think, like 7 hours or something crazy like that. And there was a total of almost 50 apparatus from like 5 counties. I mean, it was nuts. So that was the biggest thing I'd been on. And that was on this volunteer department.
So how long? That was what? I guess 2.5, almost 3 years you were volunteering straight here? You were 21 by the time you...
I was 20 when I went to the Air Force.
Okay.
So no, I only had about a year and a half.
But you got a lot of experience.
I mean, I think I ran like 86% of the calls for the whole year. So like I only missed, 14% of 400 calls, whatever that is. I'm not doing that math. But, so yeah, I had a lot of experience. And so to flash forward on that, I ended up meeting my wife, got married. I still felt like, God was calling me to join the Air Force, and it was definitely a necessary step.
You went from this volunteer situation, and then all of a sudden now you're going into the Air Force. So tell me a little bit about that and what happened.
Well, there was a number of things. I got to select jobs that I would like. They call it your job dream sheet. And, they had told me ahead of time, especially my recruiter, he's like, look, I've never even known anybody to get a fire job. It's one of the smallest career fields in the entire Air Force. Good luck. That's what he told me. That's what a number of other people told me. I
remember you telling me that.
Yeah. So I went there, and there was this really cool E7 Master Sergeant there that was, he had been messing with everybody. And then, he finally walked up to me, and he's like, what are you wanting to do? I was like, firefighting. He's like, do you have any experience? He was doing it as like well, do you actually have any experience? I was like, yes, sir. That's what I do right now. He's like, really? Do you have like certifications for it? I was like, in the state of Illinois, yes. Huh. Okay, I tell you what. He's like, I'm going to do you solid. I'm going to go ahead. I will jot your name down. I'm going to put a note in your file. And if any fire jobs flag up, it's going to go straight to your recruiter. So if this does happen, and I'm not saying it's going to happen because those slots don't come available very often. He said, but if a slot pops up and it's open, you better be ready to answer the phone when your recruiter calls you the first time. I was like, yes, sir. And then, goodness, maybe a month or 2 later, I got called for one job. He said he couldn't tell me what it was. I found out later what it was. Can't tell you what it is now, but especially not on this. It would have been a cool job, I would say. But No, I turned that one down. And then the very next call I got, which was like not even a week after that time that I turned the first job down, the recruiter goes, "You're not going to believe this, because I don't, but there's a fire slot, yes or no?" I was like, "Yes, absolutely." He goes, "All right, done. It's blocked off. You're in it. I'll call you back with details on when you leave." And then I think his date he gave me was probably 5 months after that. He said, "All right, April 8th. You're going to be going up to St. Louis. April 9th, you're going to be shipping out of St. Louis." So that's what happened. It was definitely a God thing. That step also propelled me to where I am now. So,
And tell me a little bit about that, the military. You got a totally different focus on training and some things that would have taken you years to gather you got in the United States Air Force.
So that was a best of both worlds thing. So I had the crazy, you have to do everything by yourself kind of mentality. So I knew how to do, a lot of things in the fire scene. I had seen a lot. I learned multiple positions. I'd learned multiple jobs.
And that's from volunteering.
From volunteer side, because it's pretty much the Wild West. And then going over to the Air Force side, once I finished basic, I went to the Department of Defense Fire Academy. And it being military, extremely structured. It was a 3.5 month long academy. They covered first responder, EMR, emergency medical responder, which is like baby EMT basically. And then the rest of it is all hands on deck. We do Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2. Then we go to ARF, aircraft rescue firefighting. Which is actually a rather difficult class. We did hazardous materials awareness, hazardous materials operations, all that in the 3.5 months. I'll say the Department of Defense Fire Academy is the most physically demanding thing that I have ever done. It's military, so they're still screaming at you like, you're still in basic. They're pounding you to the ground more physically. Basic was a cakewalk compared to this as far as physical goes. That definitely armed me for some good instructional do's and don'ts that are by the book. And then once I got out of DoD Fire Academy, then I went to my first base, Grand Forks Air Force Base, in North Dakota. That was also really interesting. So the biggest thing that I can say about being on active duty as a firefighter in the Air Force is that you will train. But I can tell you that every situation I've ever been in since then, my training is always what kind of kicks in my brain, just because of how much we trained. I can't tell you how many, fire hydrants we would sit there and hook up to. We would even do that in the winter. There would be like 3 feet of snow, and like a snow drift could be like 5 or 6 feet. And they're like, "All right, we know there's a hydrant over there. I want you to go ahead and dig it out and then make a connection." I mean, they did stuff like that all the time. I had a deployed vacation to Al Udeid, Qatar. I got to clarify that. But that was a unique experience. That's the busiest airspace in the entire world, just because of the amount of flights. Every 3 minutes, 24 hours a day, nonstop, there was an aircraft taking off and an aircraft landing. Not only did we have building fires on that deployment, but we had aircraft fires, landing gear fires.
And these were aircraft, some of them that were loaded with ordnance.
Yeah, the tempo there was very high. The expectation was high because that equipment is absolutely necessary for the having a complete mission. I can tell you there was one fire. It's called an APU, auxiliary power unit. It's basically like a tiny jet engine that doesn't add propulsion. Its whole job is to be a generator. We had one of those catch on fire on a KC-135 refueler that was completely full of fuel. So you have a refueling aircraft that carries almost 4 times its traditional amount of fuel on fire. And I'd never dealt with that before, but it was one of those things training took over. I'm going to ladder the front side of the wing on the Sector 1. A lot of, you knew what you were supposed to do. It's just now you actually, instead of having fake smoke, you got real smoke, real heat. Because we train, we had the fire out within 2 minutes and saved the entire aircraft. So having that structure, made an impact.
Didn't you get some hazmat?
So when I was in the Air Force, I did hazardous materials technician. Mine was a nuclear focused class though. So it was a weapons of mass destruction focused. My certification actually says hazardous materials technician, weapons of mass destruction. The base I went to receive it was actually a base that had nukes. So I was active duty for 3.5 years. But I ended up taking an early release program when they were drawing down the military in 2015. So I got out of active duty. I swapped over to the reserves, Air Force Reserves at Scott Air Force Base, came back home to Southern Illinois, and ended up actually getting hired full-time at the same fire department that I was a volunteer at before I went in the Air Force.
So you came back this time. Also, you were given a rank when you got here. The department actually controls an airport,
yes,
and has an aircraft ARF program here. You came back and you had all this experience from the Air Force for that.
And that certification did transfer, so
that was one for sure.
Yeah. That was instrumental in me being hiring, definitely, is the fact that I already had ARF experience, and it was real world ARF experience. Yes, we have a regional airport that does have commercial flights going in and out. They're usually small twin prop, commercial aircraft. We had charter planes that would come in as well, 737s, occasionally 747, 757, some Airbus, 320s, 321s, just little smaller frame jets. And we also were a pit stop for a lot of the Guard and Reserve pilots for all the branches that were doing their annual tour flights. They would generally, stop here constantly. So you occasionally get your F-22, your F-15, F-16, F-18s. Sometimes C-130, it was a C-5, it was a C-17, not C-5, but number of aircraft that would fly in here, it's pretty unique that you usually don't see at airports. But we ran the 274 square miles on the structural side, and we also had the airport as well.
So now you make it back. We're in Southern Illinois. Like you said, you're working there. And you wind up getting a total different, unique experience. Tell us a little bit about that when you came back.
I'm full-time. We won't talk about the rank. I have some coworkers that are listening that'll make fun of me. So, but yeah.
No, he did well. He was fine. He wound up. You wound up being an officer when you got back here.
Yeah, pretty young. But it was a unique experience. I'd sit there and try to pass on information that I knew, some experience I had, which although, I'd only been in the fire service for 6 years, I still was able to pass on the stuff I know. And most of the stuff that I was able to draw from was from constant training. And I could tell a massive difference when I came back from the Air Force. The way I thought was different. I never questioned what I should do. I kind of knew what to do. And I really identified that as, falling back on the training I had in the Air Force, because it's drilled into us. I mean, I had ICS 300 and 400, that's big scale FEMA disaster, instant command classes and stuff, and got my officer classes and stuff like that. So just a number of other extra tools that I gained in the Air Force. When I came back here, there was some times where I was literally the only person at the station on duty. Small department, okay, but we were primarily there full time for the airport contract, not for the structural side, but we would still run if we got a call. I remember one semi-fire that I got a phone call from a neighboring city. It was technically in their city limits, but they called and they said, "Do you see any smoke if you look out to the south of you?" I was like, "Hold on." I look out. I was like, "Oh yeah, a lot of smoke, black smoke." He's like, "Can you roll a rig out there?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." They didn't know it was just me.
You almost single-handedly put out.
No, I single-handedly did.
You did do that. That was you. And somebody, I remember, recorded that. Of course, I think I put that on the air, didn't I?
Oh yeah. No, it was out before Marion Fire had pulled their hand line, or even they were just standing back watching me. It was kind of funny.
But the building that this semi was up against was how many? It was huge.
That building was it's for sure the largest in Illinois. It's the largest freestanding building in Illinois. And to my knowledge, in the Southeast, there's only one other building, which is ironically in Memphis, is larger square footage as a freestanding building. That's the Brother Industries plant.
I think in Bartlett,
Yes,
Tennessee.
it's in Bartlett, Tennessee. This one is the second largest in the southeast. And the door was open to the building that the semi was butted up against. So initially it was the cab caught on fire. I don't know how. I don't really care, but it took me about maybe a minute and a half to be able to drive over there by myself. For Marion Fire, it's like a 7 minutes response roughly for them. So I got there pretty quick. I had to, put the pumper in pump gear. I had to flake out the line, then go back, charge the line, then go ahead and get the kinks out of it, and then start going to work. I gave myself like 100 PSI at the nozzle, and it's just me manhandling the nozzle. It was starting to catch the gasket material on the trailer itself that was attached to the semi cab. And so, I just, again, training, exposures first. I cooled down the trailer part, then I started putting out the fire. And then about the time I had put out most of it, that's when Marion had pulled up, and they pulled out their own pre-connect, and then they started doing their own, overhaul on it. But, what the captain walked up to me and said, he goes, "If I would have known it was just you, I wouldn't have even asked." He's like, "But you did a good job." I was like, "Okay, thanks." We had a number of wildland fires that were so big that they were caught on like the National Weather Service's radar. There was one fire. It started out as a hay bale fire, so we had like an entire row of like 30 hay bales on fire. But then we also had a garage on fire and 3 cars on fire that were in the garage, a car that was outside the garage on fire, and there's a house fire, there's a shed fire, and there's also a propane tank in the middle of all this. So, and it's in the woods now. So we had a hay bale fire, a wildland, woodland fire, vehicle fire, house fire, and then you're trying not to get blown up by a propane tank. So I can't say I've had that experience in Memphis Fire Department.
One incident you had, I think, was probably your first fatality in a fire, or was that your first? But it was one of them. I remember you went in and found somebody.
In probably about a 4-month span, I had 3. So the first one that you're talking about was the first in an actual house fire. But I had, I'd already had some other fatalities. I was working for a private ambulance company for a little bit, so I'd already gotten exposed to a little bit of that. Cardiac arrest, drownings, the plane crash. That's another massive one. Here. Yeah. That's for another time. That's a cool story, but. No, that house fire, yeah, it came out as someone confirmed inside the structure. It was probably about a 2,000 square foot home, something like that. And the entire backside of the house when we pulled up was already vented through the roof, obviously. And the whole backside of the house has flashed. And then upstairs had flashed. I mean, it was nothing but flame from the ceiling to the ground. So as soon as we pulled up, me and a guy we had working part-time for us, Blake Osborne, we just went up to it and try before you pry. It was locked, so I just smashed the door with the hammer real quick. As soon as I slung the door open, I could see the door hit a foot, in a shoe, and it kind of jiggled back and forth. And even though it was like super smoky, I could tell. I was like, "Oh, that's a foot," and I just started screaming, "He's right here!" Even though like most of the house is completely involved, the majority of it's flashed over. The guy was right by the door, so I just told Blake, I was like, "Hey, you grab the feet, I'll grab the head." The head end was actually, halfway into the living room, and we had flames rolling over and stuff. Grabbed under the shoulders. Blake grabbed the feet and legs, and then we pulled them out real quick, and then I started to lose grip on the shoulders, so I ended up switching to the hands. Ended up pulling off a little bit of skin off this gentleman. He had some burns to his face, neck, hands, a little bit on the arms. And turns out this gentleman was he was deaf and had told his significant other that he quit smoking. And apparently he had not quit smoking. He went on the back porch, and that's where it started. And from what we could tell, he threw a cigarette butt out, and somehow it caught the porch on fire, which caught the house on fire. Based on his positioning, it looks like he tried to open the door, get to the door, because he was right by the front door, and it looks like he just collapsed and fell backwards. But unfortunately, he didn't make it, and yeah, that was the first fatality on a fire I'd had. And again, this was on this combination volunteer department.
Since that was the first fire fatality, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
that was the one that I remember you called. You talked about that, and I could tell that was on your mind. And the thoughts were, I could tell in your head, if I'd gotten there a little bit earlier, maybe. You were talking a little bit about that, which you couldn't control that.
Yeah, I definitely can say that I've done a good job over the years of kind of recognizing when my performance has been where I wanted it to be. And what I mean by that is I don't think we could have gotten there any faster. The only way we would have gotten faster is if the person who reported it called earlier and then the dispatcher got it out faster. That's something I've definitely worked on over the years. Is it's not your incident, it's not your emergency, it's that person's. You're there to do what you can to try and correct and stabilize the incident. And you can't always do everything. So, God put you in a certain place at a certain time for a certain reason. And if you're not there at the right time, then God didn't want you there at the right time. You just gotta kind of accept that.
So after you were here for a little while back in Southern Illinois, working for the same fire department that you originally volunteered for after coming out of the Air Force, and you even got involved in going to paramedic school and some other things. That was the other thing you were involved with here. Mm-hmm. So you got a lot of emergency medical at that point, to a degree, until you get to your next landing, which is come to Memphis.
Uh-huh. Like I had said earlier, this department I was working at we didn't run medicals. We didn't run first responders, period. It was just fires, extrications, stuff like that. So I don't really know why. I mean, I didn't have a necessity for it. It wasn't a requirement. I just felt like, again, God was telling me, hey, you need to do a little bit more. So I ended up, getting my EMT in Illinois, and then I went through paramedic school. Started working for that private ambulance company. We did have 911 contracts, so I was very blessed to be running with this one particular paramedic, Brandon Rowland. He was awesome medic. He and I had so much fun. I learned a lot from him. He's crazy, but man, I learned a lot from him. That definitely opened the door to the realities of what the majority of your EMS calls are. The majority of them are not emergencies. And, I got a taste of that as well as real emergencies up here. Eventually, the opportunity arose where I just happened to be on firerecruit.com. They post like all the major, fire openings that are being advertised in the entire country. I just happened to be glancing one day. Something just told me to get on there, and I checked it out, and I saw Memphis Fire Department. I was like, okay. It didn't say recruit next to it. It said lateral hire. And I was like, Memphis doesn't hire laterals. And I think I gave you a call, mm-hmm. and then you called
the chief of training.
Yes.
At the time, which was Chief Ronnie Beasley.
Mm-hmm. And then he said, yeah, no, we're thinking about going the lateral routes. We're going to give it a try. And then you got me in contact with him, and I actually talked to him on the phone for probably 30 or 40 minutes. So they weren't just hiring paramedics; they're hiring EMT basics and advanced EMTs. And at the time, my paramedic stuff was not going to be able to transfer down there. So me taking that position, I already knew I was going to have to start back over from EMT basic, and that's exactly what ended up happening.
But you did have the certs when that happened because of your experience in the military. Yeah. Those transferred immediately with Memphis.
Yeah,
that really helped you.
Going back to that wonderful IFSAC Pro Board discussion I had with you earlier, in Tennessee, I just turned in the stuff I had for the military, and then they gave me a letter from the state saying, we're just going to grant you reciprocity for this, and this. So I've gotten reciprocity for literally every certification I've ever gotten in the military through Tennessee.
Here you show up. This is the very department that one of the two departments as a little kid you used to find yourself in the cab of a fire engine. And here you were now working getting on in Memphis, and you went through the lateral program. The fire school was pretty much, this is how we do it.
The whole purpose of the Lateral Academy was just to teach us Memphis way of firefighting. National standard says that a forward lay for supply line is from the hydrant to the scene. Well, Memphis says a forward lay is from the scene to the hydrant. Now you're going to be a nurse pumper. So there was just a whole bunch of unique stuff that we had to get our heads around.
And it's true almost with every big city. Everybody has their own little ways of doing things.
And it has to be that way.
It's really an orientation for 9 weeks into Memphis, right?
That is exactly what it is. It's an orientation. It's a little bit different now. Now they actually do PT and some other stuff. But once we got out on company, there was a lot of people that didn't really know what to make of us. Some of the older guys, who had more than 25 years on, they for the most part, they liked the idea. Once people started to adapt to it and realize, there's a reason for that, especially because I was able to go on company and just perform immediately. Again, I got to give credit and fall back on the Air Force training. I already had, experience with that. And then Williamson County, a lot of it I'd already done, and I'd done it with far less personnel. The only thing that I had to get used to was vertical ventilation, cutting a hole.
After you go through this program, which is the lateral hire, you get on an engine company, and you wind up with some pretty good guys. I remember the first engine house you had kind of got you acclimated. And
it's ironic. They sent me to a house that's supposed to be slow. I mean, my lieutenant had like 28 years on or something like that. And one of the other lieutenants is one of the originals, I like to call him, from the early 90s. He was at, 750 Adams.
I knew him. And I felt really comfortable Washington. You had these guys.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of experience over there. And I was the youngest person as far as experience-wise goes in that firehouse. And that includes all of my fire experience. Everybody there had at least 12 years or more. So it was unique. It was supposed to be an old retirement house is what they're calling it. But that in that little 3-month span before I deployed to Kuwait, it was one day we ran 4 house fires in one day at this place. And, they blamed me. They said that I brought it. But, the fire service, it just comes in waves. Sometimes it hits, slow stations. Sometimes it hits, quick stations. Sometimes the fastest station in the city as far as house fire goes will have a drought, and then it moves somewhere else. I don't have an explanation for it, but I was just in that house and probably ran, 30 house fires my first 3 months easily. I mean, it was crazy.
You had that. Then you go to Kuwait. That was for the reserves. So you're still Memphis, and then with the Air Force Reserves. And after that deployment, you come back. What happened after that?
I got on the ambulance and had been detailed out. So basically, I'm assigned to Engine 50, but I kept getting sent over to Engine 42 and riding Unit 25 and Engine 40, riding Unit 10. So I was getting my turn on the unit, and I really think that was the battalion chief at the time, like, let's get him seasoned, because I was away from my station for probably 4 months. And in doing that, I was able to work with some other stations and meet a lot of other guys. Ended up meeting some of the guys over at Engine 39, which is in the heart of Whitehaven, which is a hood. After meeting the lieutenant, meeting some of those guys over there, I was like, I need to work for this guy. I need to work for this lieutenant. And I told my lieutenant, who my first lieutenant was awesome, but he had already told me, he's like, I'm trying to go out to the training center. He's like, I'm going to be retiring. So, keep that in mind. I kept that in mind. I ended up going over to Engine 39, which was kind of known as Unit 39, which there's not an ambulance number 39. We ran a lot of first responders, but we also ran a lot of fire as well. Going over to there was a different experience. Like I said, I had a fantastic lieutenant. That definitely exposed me to even more of the EMS side, because the units I was riding on were really hot for, shooting, stabbings, cardiac arrest, all the good stuff, as people call it, the juicy. But then I also had a little brief period where in like 3 months I had an unbelievable amount of pediatric cardiac arrest and stuff like that. Then eventually, after I spent a little over a year at Engine 39, the house was starting to break up. People were either retiring or transferring. So I got kind of got an invitation to go to a special operations house, and so I took it.
What is the difference in special operations? And again, your training that you got, some of it from the Air Force and other places, really helped you getting into special ops. What's the difference?
Everybody there is the same way. Everybody's go-getters. If there's something that needs to get done, they don't just walk past it. They do it. Everybody's capable of stuff. There's a significant amount more training that's required in special operations. Initially, I think it's about to change, but initially, you have to have hazardous materials technician, which I already had one, the secret squirrel nuclear one. I'd already done confined space, so that was not that difficult, but I already had hazardous materials, ended up doing rope tech, confined space, trench technician, structural collapse specialist, and, that's your 5 to be able to be assigned to a rescue. But, all that training and stuff, we're constantly training. We're constantly doing something. I'm constantly on and off the rescue truck. The unique thing about the rescue truck and even the pumper, the pumpers are more for the hazmat side of things. They still, everybody who's on the pumper usually has some of the special operations classes, at least rope, hopefully. So they'll still respond with the rescue truck for rope rescue, but the primary thing for the pumpers is the hazmat responses. They'll go, halfway across the city, and they'll go outside of their FMZ, we call it, your response area. But what's unique to the rescue trucks in Memphis, there's 3 of them, and they respond to every high-rise, alarm, and they also respond to every fire, in the city. Between the 3 of them, out of anyone in the city, you are more likely to actually go to more fires if you are on rescue. There's no other way to make more fires than be on rescue.
Describe what's the difference, I guess, if you think about your career, because you've gone, like I said, we gone from volunteer, military, come back, you work at a smaller department, which is the same one you started off with, and then now you wound up in, one of the top fire departments in the country, and very busy one, and very active one with a great heritage. And it's like any big department. It has its good sides, its bad sides. There's a lot to it. But it's not everyone has that opportunity.
No.
Tell me what's that like going through that now?
So I went volunteer, not having enough equipment. It's about funding. And the gear, probably still works. I mean, it worked all the fires I ran. I didn't get hurt, But going from that to the Air Force side, where we have impeccable gear. It's always in top-notch condition. We have fantastic training, constantly training. And then going back to the same department I was a volunteer on, back to that kind of limited manpower and limited equipment. And then going to Memphis Fire Department. As far as the firefighting side goes, I mean, within 10 minutes, you have, almost 30 guys on scene. Within 10 minutes. The first, 3 or 4 minutes, you got at least 3 pumpers that are fighting to get to the scene first. And if it's smack dab in the middle, then it's kind of one of those things of who's going to get there first? Who's going to get the nozzle? Who's going to, And that was just eye-opening for me. I think I called you after the first couple of times I made a fire. I remember this, one of the first fires I made in Memphis Fire Department. We were about to go in with the nozzle, and the guy already had the K-12 started up, and he was climbing up the ladder and was starting to cut the hole before we even made entry with the nozzle. So, I mean, that I was like, good Lord, you have the SOPs, everybody follows the SOPs, and it works like clockwork. It's incredible. It's almost a life of luxury. You're running a lot, at the same time you're not having to work as hard because you have way more personnel.
You guys have some of the most advanced stuff. You guys have SCBAs, and everybody has their own thermal imaging camera on it, the TIC. I guess you maybe get used to that, but when you're sitting with that gear, you have more than one pair of turnouts. Was that kind of an amazing thing to have happen when you got there?
Oh yeah, I have 2 sets of turnouts, so I make maybe 2 house fires in one day and get nasty. And I'm not able to take my stuff over to the contracted cleaners, or it's a weekend and they're not open. I swapped my other turnouts, and then I got a clean set of turnouts. When we're on scene, We have an infinite amount of SCBA bottles we can go through, basically, because we have a air truck that's going to show up, and he's got hundreds of full cylinders that we can swap to. Our rehab guys, they have a set of gloves that we can swap our dirty ones out on scene with. We can get a new hood if ours is disgusting. A lot of that's an effort to kind of curb the cancer, and that's a national effort, really. But Memphis Fire is definitely, especially considering the size of the department and the amount of money they've had to spend. Our equipment is top notch. I mean, even the oldest pumpers were made in 2008, which for a department that has 58 stations, and you're talking about, I guess we have 57 engines, and a whole bunch of 100-foot rear mount trucks and everything else. I mean, you're talking about having, almost everybody has brand new pumpers that are no more than 5 years old. Our SCBAs, they're MSA G1s, and they got I think it's unique to us, actually. I mean, it was a feature they offered, but there's been no other large department that's gone up on this deal. And we have, our own personal ticks that are included in the control module on our SCBAs. So it's kind of funny because it's SOP to bring the tick camera in with us. We all have it. It's been incredible. Even the new radios are awesome. I have no complaint about our equipment, honestly.
For someone who may be interested in becoming a firefighter, what is it you find to be the greatest satisfaction with firefighting?
In order to actually be successful at this job and not just go in it for the T-shirt, you have to have the right heart and mindset for it, and you got to have a servant's heart. That's what my whole purpose and this whole journey's been. I feel like I'm put on this earth to help people, and that's what this job does. And definitely the medical side. A lot of people hate the medical side. I'm the opposite. And the reason I'm the opposite, the firefighting side is fun, but you're showing up after, everybody's things have been destroyed, and you can't do anything to fix that. Medical side, you can reverse someone dying with just some drugs or different type of skill, that you've been, given through instruction and everything that you learn. And that's what drives me for this job. That's what makes me want to keep doing it. That's what makes me be okay and accept, all the crazy stuff that I experience. It's the servant's heart. We're supposed to help each other. And I feel like that's what I'm doing. So for anyone who wants to get in this field, don't just do it because it sounds cool. It is cool. I'm just being honest. Pretty awesome. You really have to have the right mindset and understand that it's not all, glory. There's a lot of guts involved with it. You're going to see guts. You're going to see destruction. You're going to see people's lives torn apart. You just got to understand your purpose. And if that sounds like you want to help someone no matter what is going on, then this is the right job for you.
That's good. Thanks, Russ. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. Thanks for taking the time. The Making of a Firefighter. This is part one of my interview with my own son, firefighter Thomas Mann, Jr. Coming up, part two, a storyline extra, the reality of the job. In part two, I have a frank and tough discussion with my son about the job. Post-traumatic stress, losing friends to suicide, coping on the job and at home, and knowing when to get help. The reality of the job, my next storyline. And be sure to check out our website at EmergencyFD.com. That's EmergencyFD.com. And while you're there, help support the production of this podcast with any donation of any amount. It would be greatly appreciated. Look for that Donate tab on the screen on our website, EmergencyFD.com. And be sure to subscribe and follow to be notified when our next podcast is available. If you would like to contact Emergency FD Storyline with comments or to suggest a story or a subject for an upcoming podcast, email us at storyline@emergencyfd.com. That's storyline@emergencyfd.com. I'm Tom Mann, and I want to thank you for listening. There are many stories coming on Emergency FD Storyline. Join us.